Interesting game, this. Maresca, former assistant, of course, to Pep at City a few seasons ago. But let's talk about City, your former side then, Nedum. It's been one of those interesting weeks, is it not? I mean, 6-0 winners against Ipswich, and then they failed to hold on to a 2-0 lead against PSG.
I remember it. But I think one thing that's to be highlighted is that game against Ipswich is very different to a game against Paris Saint-Germain at the Parc des Princes. A game where for Paris Saint-Germain, they had to win, you know, so there's going to be a case of them being on the front foot. And I think for City, after the Ipswich game, I think Guardiola himself spoke about how he felt like they were going back into more normal patterns. It seemed as if it was something more familiar performance-wise that he'd hoped from his side.
Yeah.
Whereas in some of the games before, the result might have been there, but the performance wasn't. But you then head to Paris and some of those sort of like frailties were there again. From when they took the 2-0 lead, great, and I think a better version of City probably dictate the tempo and control the game from there.
Yeah.
But it never felt like they did that. In that second half, they were swarmed upon by PSG. And in the end, like 4-2, I think that's a nice result for City because it could have been more.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was a bit of a false lead, really. I think that the way that the goals fell was probably a little bit lucky for City to even be leading by that scoreline because PSG deserved to win that game. And it was a very tough game. And because of their previous results in the Champions League, they're in the position they're in. But they'll probably take more from that Ipswich win than they would from that PSG result because they're almost, I don't know, maybe it's harsh, but I do think they're finding the Champions League such a challenge that now for them it is probably all about rescuing the Premier League and where they can finish.
That's a good one, you know, and I don't necessarily disagree, but what I would say is I think something that's changed from, say, last week when they played against Ipswich is in that Ipswich game, Jeremy Doku played well, Ruben Diaz played well, now both of those players are injured. So they've now taken a step back from a position, say, personnel-wise, which they would have been happy with before. And each situation is different. But again, like, City have 8 points in the Champions League, and initially they won their first 3 games. And they weren't against, say, the biggest names within the competition itself, but there was a point where it felt like the flow was there, and now it's turned, it's gone the other way.
Flo was there, was she?
Flow's always there, but now,
always lurking.
as I say, it's not as good as they would hope for.
No.
But win is a win, is it not?
But what it means is, though, I mean, Manchester City, who, you know, we go into most seasons in the Champions League thinking they're one of the favourites to win it. They're 25th in that table.
It's great
and they're clinging on. They're clinging on to their Champions League kind of hopes at the minute. And it's all or nothing against Club Brugge.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't think many people would have had on their bingo card that Man City versus Club Brugge in match week 8 of the Champions League would be such a big game for both sides.
Yeah.
With City trying to go above Brugge in the table. But I think it just shows, again, the sort of toughness of the competition like the Champions League, especially in this new format. Because before the game against Paris Saint-Germain were in 26th. That same side that dominated Man City had also had a tough time in the competition. So, you know, they've got a chance. They have to win. And it's going to be an interesting game.
Is he going to be stuck straight in against Chelsea? Or what do you think? Yeah.
I think that's a good question. I think Marmoush
I ask one very rarely, by the way.
Listen, I'm going to celebrate it. But I think seeing Marmoush play in the Bundesliga, he's sometimes playing a front two.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that he can do that does offer something a bit different should he decide to play alongside of Haaland. But the fact he can also play off the left is also interesting. And in some ways, I think Guardiola will try and find a way to sort of press on any weaknesses that maybe Chelsea have. Maybe going with the front two is going to be an issue for Chelsea, but essentially for Guardiola, he knows himself, like, he kind of needs these players to hit the ground running. And a January transfer is never an ideal, but the fact is the players are there, they're young, they're hungry, and they want to make a difference. And so to put them into the side, you know, that could be the spark that they need.
And it's not historically a window that City have spent big in either.
Not at all.
I think it's Laporte was the last sort of big January signing. And this has been, across the whole Premier League, a much busier January transfer window than we're used to seeing because over the last few years, it has got a little bit quieter. It's been the smaller budget window. But I think because there are a few desperate clubs like City, no offence,
No, listen, I'm offended.
They are, you know, I think European clubs can probably smell it a little bit and say, OK, this is our chance to move now. So I think it's very interesting that City have gone all out and spent this much in a January window because they really must believe that it will transform their season in some capacity.
But it's not just been about incomings at City. Kyle Walker has sealed his move to AC Milan. What do you make of that?
I think for a club to be selling their club captain, especially, you know, halfway through a season, is a strange one. I think for him, the service to the club has been fantastic. I think some people, when he first went there were questions asked like, will he work in a Guardiola system? But then by the time he's leaving, he's known as one of the best right-backs in the history of the Premier League. So clearly he's had lots of good years there. The fact that he was lifting up that trophy, that 4th Premier League title in a row, like the history makers, you know, that's massive. But in fairness, this season hasn't been the same for him, as is the case with other players as well. where he's not performed to his absolute best. His fitness hasn't been to its absolute best, and it's not quite worked out. And as an older player, because it's not that he's old, you know, you're faced with these questions, well, what's next? And for him, maybe there's a guarantee of more football if he was to go somewhere else. And the fact that AC Milan can call it, I think it's credit to him.
It does seem to have escalated quite quickly. Didn't it, Flo?
Yeah.
I mean, there was talk about his legs going, not the same player that he was. Is it because he was feeling the harsh end of maybe, you know...
I think it was really interesting because obviously I think we've seen a trend with managers now actually being quite explicit about potential moves. We saw it with Ammer and Rashford. We've seen it with Maresca about Ben Chilwell as well. And when Pep came out, I can't remember after what game it was, but he came out straight away, said, yes, Kyle Walker wants a move and is probably going to move this window.
Yeah.
Even though there'd always been signs that might happen, suddenly within a few weeks he's gone. That is quite quick, but obviously for club and player, it's one that works. And obviously as a coach, you'd much rather someone goes than have someone who doesn't want to be there, who is struggling in a team that's struggling too. You might as well make things happen. And the interesting thing is those other players I mentioned are still working out their futures.
Yeah. Chelsea go to the Etihad looking to rectify a terrible record against City. No win in 10 in all competitions. The last one, 2021 Champions League final.
See, what is going on here?
Which is an interesting one.
I'm just getting over that now.
Sorry to bring it up, but I thought you'd be over it by now.
No.
But if there's ever a time to try and put that wretched record to one side, is this a good time to play City?
I think these last few months have been the best time to play City we've probably seen in years. You know, seeing some of the fragility and the fact that it always seems to be in a certain way. Maybe someone makes an individual error. Maybe there's an injection of speed that puts them under pressure. Maybe some of the takeaways you can have from them if you put them under pressure. Like, I think that is good. But I think the other side of this is this Chelsea side, they've won their first game in 6 just recently. Their dip in form. You know, they're not over that by itself. I think their win against Wolves was a good one on the Monday night. But yeah, you've got to have belief. I think every team now would have belief going to play against Man City. But if that belief turns to arrogance, very quickly you'll get punished. But again, like I say, that result for Chelsea at home to Wolves is a big one for them because once upon a time, probably a month ago, they had a chance to win a game and be top of the league.
And I do think in some of those poor results for Chelsea, the performances were pretty good. Only really the Bournemouth game where I thought, OK, Bournemouth should have won that game. I do think around that possible red card that wasn't a red card, I think Chelsea were a little bit unlucky. So in all of those results, those poor results, I think there's an element of bad luck for Chelsea that obviously never helps. But I do think their performances have shown that there's a level of consistency they get. Defensively, there's still a weakness, but I think this is probably the most I've seen in a Chelsea side recently that I feel like could beat City. Yeah,
with a Cole Palmer, who might have a point to prove against his former club.
I think so, and I think he's proved the point before. But I think he's always, you know, he relishes that challenge. I think he's the sort of player as well that, you know, you see young players when the pressure gets to them and they start getting a lot of attention. But ever since he's come through and been a star for Chelsea, I mean, think of what he nearly dragged England back into a Euros final. I do think he is such a typical player who embraces those moments. He loves the limelight, even though he's obviously quite a low, quiet personality. But the way he expresses himself is on the pitch. And I do think a setup like this against his old club, I think that's prime for him, whereas other players would have maybe shied away from that challenge.
I think it's a bit like Nedum. He just plays things under the radar. I actually think he's got a really good personality.
Me? Or Cole?
Cole.
I was going to say, because you're wrong about me. I don't.
He's a funny guy, but he's a quiet guy, right? That's the thing. He's like, he's unassuming, but he's got something really kind of charming and funny about him. And I think the way he really expresses himself is on the football pitch. What he can do with the ball is so impressive.
Yeah. It should be a good game, though, right? It's got all the ingredients for a terrific encounter.
Yeah, absolutely, it should. You know, we're talking about Cole Palmer and the quality that he has, but they've got so much attacking threat as well, being fed by him. And for City, they'll know they have to defend really well to try and keep them away. But then Chelsea, as Flo was saying, like, defensively at times, they don't look as good as, say, they could be. Some of the setups that they have. At that game there, it's a great goal that he scored against Fulham, but Fulham beat them. Fulham came back to win that game at Stamford Bridge. So they have their frailties. No team is perfect. And because they're such a young side, you get some real good highs, but at times, in moments, you get some real bad lows. Yeah. And I think when you come up against the side, which is probably one of the most experienced in Man City, you could talk yourself into any outcome.
And you can see the influence that he has, including those Chelsea mascots that we saw against Wolves on Monday, just as they were obviously lining up pre-kick-off, almost most of them giving the old Cole Palmer's goal celebration.
Yeah, my son does that as well when he scores goals. Yeah. Listen, it's a great celebration, but interestingly, is not Morgan Rogers'
He
celebration?
got it from Morgan Rogers.
Yeah, there has been that sort of I did it first, and now unfortunately Morgan Rogers is playing catch up. But you know, if he made it his own, so that's all it takes.
Cold Rogers, yeah.
See, he should have trademarked it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Right.
Well, Chelsea versus Manchester City, or Manchester City versus Chelsea at the Etihad on Saturday, late kickoff. Well, it's gonna be an interesting football match. Manchester City, came back against Ipswich and trounced them 6-0 in the Premier League, and everybody thought that they were back. Wow, they were back. Everybody was saying they were back. Unfortunately, in the midweek in the Champions League, they led 2-0 at PSG, and PSG came back at home and won 4-2. Well, that same poor defensive attitude or display by Manchester City came back. So this game is going to be very interesting in many ways. Chelsea are not firing at the moment. They are having issues in attack and not defending pretty well. Manchester City are pretty much on the same boat, but Manchester City will score goals if you give them opportunity in attack. That's the difference. And they are playing at home. But this is a huge 6-pointer. If Chelsea manage to lose this game, they are in trouble of making top 4, because Manchester City will leapfrog them and enter into the top 4 in the Premier League, and Chelsea will drop out of the top 4. So that's what is at stake. And if Chelsea win, they will create a little bit of gap between them and Manchester City. So a lot on the line in this game. Chelsea winning at Manchester City is not going to be simple. They lost at Stamford Bridge in the first game of the season, 2-0. But they have improved since then. But they are coming off a moment of we'll actually blip up form since December until their win against Wolves, which is at 3-1. And right now, I think in that game, they did pretty well defensively, because if you look at the SG against in that game, that was their second best SG against conceded in the Premier League this season, just behind their SG conceded against Crystal Palace at Stamford Bridge. So it tells you that defense was a little bit better with Reece James coming back, and also Chalobah also coming back in the team from loan at Crystal Palace. So they had a little bit of stability at the back, experience. Tosin, Chalobah, and Reece James does a lot of experience. I mean, they can be young, but they have played a lot of games, plus Kukulera, who scored one of the goals against Wolves. So if they maintain the same lineup, but I think with Colwell coming back, Tosin could drop to the bench. But with Colwell, Reece James, and Chalobah making the back three in possession, and then Kukulera playing at left back, attacking left back, I still think they have a solid defense. But can they keep Haaland quiet? Your guess is as good as mine, but time will tell. But if they manage to stop City, then I see Chelsea winning at Etihad.